On the afternoon of May 7, 1915, the sleek black hull of the RMS Lusitania cut through the calm waters of the Celtic Sea. She was only hours from safe harbor in Liverpool after a six-day journey from New York. Aboard were 1,959 souls, passengers and crew, many dismissing the stark public warnings issued by the Imperial German Embassy. Precisely at 2:10 p.m., a single torpedo from the German submarine U-20 found its mark. The impact, according to Commander Walter Schwieger's log, was immediately followed by a detonation of extraordinary heaviness. This mysterious second explosion tore the heart out of the luxury liner, initiating a catastrophe unlike any seen before. The proud flagship of the Cunard Line was a massive vessel, yet she plunged toward the seabed with frightening speed. Lifeboats jammed, systems failed, and the great ship, designed to be unsinkable, was gone in less than 18 minutes. The final official toll was 1,198 dead, including 128 citizens of the neutral United States. The sinking of the Lusitania was instantly an act of infamy. It was a direct, calculated challenge to the civilized world, exposing the terror of unrestricted submarine warfare. But the true story is not simply one of German aggression. It is one of high-stakes deception, strategic ambiguity, and an official cover-up that lasted for decades. This single devastating act off the coast of Old Head of Kinsale, Ireland, placed the isolationist United States on an inescapable path toward intervention and fundamentally altered the nature of modern conflict. The Lusitania was conceived in a fierce maritime rivalry. By the turn of the century, the prestigious Blue Riband, the trophy for the fastest transatlantic crossing, had been captured by German liners. Britain, under pressure, utilized the vast resources of the Cunard Line to build two record breakers. Launched in 1906 and completed in 1907, the Lusitania was the largest ship in the world at the time, measuring 787 feet in length. She boasted technological marvels, most significantly, her steam turbine engines, which powered four massive propellers and allowed her to maintain speeds that redefined ocean travel, routinely exceeding 25 knots. Crucially, the British government subsidized her construction under a secret agreement known as the Armed Merchant Cruiser Reserve. The ship's decks and inner structure were deliberately reinforced to accommodate 6-inch quick-firing guns if the Admiralty chose to convert her to a warship. This agreement blurred her legal status from the start. When World War I began in 1914, she was briefly requisitioned but was quickly returned to civilian service. The reason was purely logistical. The massive coal consumption of her four turbines, nearly 1,000 tons per day, was too severe a drain on the Royal Navy's limited fuel reserves. The great speed, intended as a military asset, was now an economic liability. Yet she continued to operate solely relying on that speed for protection. The assumption, both by the Cunard Line and its passengers, was that no submarine could keep pace with her, and that international law, rooted in the principles of the Hague Conventions, would protect her civilian passengers. Germany's desperation mounted quickly under the powerful Royal Navy blockade. By early 1915, Germany's naval policy shifted from restrained prize rules, which demanded warning and evacuation, to an existential countermeasure. On February 4, 1915, the German government declared the waters around the British Isles a war zone. They announced that starting February 18, all enemy merchant vessels encountered within this zone would be sunk without warning. This declaration represented a profound break from the conventions of naval warfare. This threat was not subtle. Days before the Lusitania's final departure from New York, the German embassy placed a stark warning advertisement in 60 major American newspapers, including the New York Herald and the New York Times. The notice was strategically placed directly adjacent to Cunard's own advertisements for the voyage. The text was unambiguous. Travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists. Vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters. Passengers like Alfred Vanderbilt, the immensely wealthy American traveler, openly scoffed at the threat. They boarded, convinced that the Germans were bluffing, or that even if attacked, the immense ship would be protected by its size and speed. This act of fatal confidence was a tragic miscalculation of the escalating brutality of the war. The German commander, whose actions would forever be linked to this disaster, was Kapitänleutnant Walter Schwieger, commanding the type U-19 submarine SM-U-20. Schwieger was a decorated, effective U-boat ace, but not one known for wanton aggression. U-20 had been operating off the Irish coast for several days. On May 5th and 6th, Schwieger sunk 3 smaller merchant steamers, exhausting his torpedo supply and using up vital fuel. By the morning of May 7th, he was low on resources and turning to home. The convergence was an accident of timing. On the afternoon of May 7th, in unusually clear weather, Schwieger was surfaced, running his diesel engines for a battery recharge. His watch sighted the Lusitania in the distance, sailing on a nearly perfect straight course. Schwieger's log reveals his internal conflict. He immediately submerged and maneuvered the U-20 to intercept. He initially judged the target to be too large and too fast for a standard torpedo attack. But the Lusitania, by an order from Captain Turner, had slowed her speed to 18 knots to maintain a rendezvous schedule with the tide at Liverpool. This slowing was a fatal error, compounded by Turner's decision not to execute anti-submarine zigzag maneuvers. The ship was, for a brief window, slow enough and close enough for the U-20's outdated torpedoes to be effective. At 2:10 p.m., Schwieger gave the order to fire one single torpedo from a distance of about 700 meters. The torpedo struck the Lusitania's starboard side, almost directly beneath the wheelhouse, but the damage from the torpedo was instantly overshadowed by the second trumbrious explosion. Schwieger himself recorded his surprise in the U-20's war diary. An unusually heavy detonation follows with a very large cloud of smoke. A second explosion must have followed, boiler or coal or powder. This powder was the key. Contemporary and post-war investigations, obstructed by British wartime secrecy, eventually confirmed the German claim. The Lusitania was carrying a significant amount of explosive contraband. The ship's manifest, later revealed, confirmed nearly 173 tons of war material. This included approximately 4.2 million rounds of rifle cartridges, 4,927 shrapnel shell casings, and percussion fuses. While the quantity of high explosive was debated, the dense mass of propellant charges and shrapnel shells in the forward cargo hold number 1 likely ignited, turning a bad hit into an immediate and irreversible catastrophe. The second explosion instantaneously compromised the integrity of the forward boiler rooms and shattered the internal longitudinal watertight bulkheads. The rapid asymmetrical flooding was no longer confined to the initial compartment. The ship was dying from the inside out. The 18 minutes between 2:10 p.m. and 2:28 p.m. were a frantic, terrifying struggle against fundamental laws of physics. The rapid flooding caused the ship to list severely to 15 degrees starboard. This severe list immediately rendered the ship's safety systems useless. On the starboard side, the lifeboat swung too far out, leaving a massive gap between the boat and the deck. Crew and passengers could not safely board.
On the port side, the list meant the lifeboat swung inward, scraping and crushing against the ship's towering funnels and the sheer side of the hull. Many boats were tragically capsized, ripped open, before they could even be lowered. Of the 48 lifeboats, more than enough for all on board, only 6 were launched successfully and safely. Captain Turner remained on the bridge, attempting to steer the ship towards the Irish coast, but the explosions had disabled the ship's steam lines and damaged the steering gear. The massive liner was simply running on momentum, a derelict ghost speeding toward its grave. The horrific scramble to survive saw acts of immense heroism and panic. Alfred Vanderbilt, who couldn't swim, was last seen helping a woman secure a baby in a lifebelt. he perished. The final death toll of 1,198 included 94 children, their tiny bodies tragically confirming the barbarity of the attack. The news reached the American public with sensational speed. The loss of 128 American lives instantly shattered the illusion of American isolation. Public fury, stoked by graphic, relentless propaganda, reached a fever pitch. President Woodrow Wilson, the staunchest proponent of neutrality, faced overwhelming political pressure to declare war. Former President Theodore Roosevelt publicly excoriated Wilson's cautious response, calling the German action piratical outrage and demanding immediate military reprisal. Wilson, however, chose a diplomatic path, understanding that premature war entry would splinter the nation. He dispatched 3 powerful diplomatic notes to Berlin, demanding Germany apologize, pay reparations, and, most importantly, abandon unrestricted submarine warfare. The ensuing diplomatic crisis led to the resignation of Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan, who believed Wilson's harsh demands compromised American neutrality. Bryan was replaced by the more hardline Robert Lansing. By September 1915, the diplomatic pressure, combined with the U-boat campaign's limited strategic effectiveness, forced Germany's hand. Berlin issued the Sussex Pledge in 1916, promising to adhere to prize rules and spare passenger ships. The diplomatic victory was real, but the moral wound remained open. The Lusitania tragedy had ensured that America's posture toward Germany would forever be one of strict accountability. The pause in unrestricted submarine warfare was merely a reprieve. By early 1917, the British blockade was succeeding, and the German High Command determined that resuming the U-boat campaign, even with the certainty of American intervention, was a necessary gamble for a quick victory. On February 1, 1917, Germany announced the immediate resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare. They bet they could starve Britain out in 5 months, a timeline that precluded a fully mobilized American army making a difference. This act was the final trigger. Germany had deliberately broken its solemn pledge, and the moral outrage cultivated by the Lusitania tragedy now boiled over. The American public was primed. The moral ambiguity of carrying contraband was overshadowed by the clear violation of the rules of war. The subsequent revelation of the Zimmerman telegram and the sinking of more American merchant ships provided the necessary final push. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson delivered his request to Congress for a declaration of war, speaking of a German government that had swept aside every restriction and was waging warfare against mankind. The United States entered World War I on April 6, 1917. While 2 years separated the sinking from the declaration, the Lusitania had provided the single, unifying moral narrative that justified the intervention to the American public. She was the ghost of American neutrality laid to rest. The aftermath of the sinking was defined by a massive, sustained effort to conceal the truth about the Lusitania's cargo and the British Admiralty's actions. The official British investigation, led by Lord Mersey, a former High Court judge, was a textbook example of whitewashing. Mersey conducted the inquiry with one goal: absolve the Admiralty and place all blame on Germany and Captain Turner. He claimed Turner was negligent for not following Admiralty instructions, despite the ambiguity of those instructions and the Admiralty's inability to provide a proper escort. The inquiry completely discounted the German claim of munitions, confirming the British narrative of an innocent passenger ship. Captain Turner, though exonerated in the final report, was subjected to immense pressure and public scrutiny, becoming a convenient scapegoat. The truth was suppressed for decades. British government files relating to the Lusitania were sealed until the late 1960s. Subsequent deep-sea explorations of the wreck, lying at 300 feet off Kinsale, have consistently found evidence supporting the contraband claim, including remnants of military shell casings and the powerful, devastating damage in the forward holds. This cover-up, meticulously detailed by historians, reveals a difficult historical truth. The British government, led at the time by First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill, made a calculated gamble, knowingly using civilian travelers and their ship's speed to deliver military supplies. The sinking of the Lusitania remains one of the most studied and contentious incidents of World War I. It was a catalyst that shifted the entire geopolitical landscape. The ultimate irony is that the torpedo aimed at military hardware delivered a psychological blow that military weaponry could not match. It was a propaganda masterpiece for the Allies, yet simultaneously the ultimate justification for the German defense that they were engaging a legitimate, if disguised, warship. The Lusitania was sunk by Walter Schwieger, a man whose actions that day made him a pariah. His end was equally grim. He died 2 years later when his new submarine, U-boat 88, struck a British mine in the North Sea, a victim of the very total war he helped usher in. The most enduring lesson of the Lusitania is its demonstration of the end of the gentlemanly war. She proved that in the industrial, total conflict of the 20th century, there was no longer a safe distinction between the civilian and the combatant. Every vessel was a weapon, every passenger a resource, and every sea a battleground. The magnificent liner, built as a symbol of peace and prosperity, became instead a monument to the ultimate strategic ruthlessness of global war. The brief, terrifying collapse of the Lusitania off the Irish coast shattered American neutrality and marked the definitive moment when the great nations of the world chose the path of unlimited warfare. The ghost of the Lusitania continues to serve as a stark reminder of the moral compromises made when survival is at stake.